So thanks for coming. I am kind of overwhelmed about being here, mainly because there's a lot of really amazing work and a lot of really cool people, and I don't know. I don't feel like I fit in. But anyways, so I've been using SketchUp for timber framing for, I've been using SketchUp since the Outlast days. I've been using SketchUp for timber framing without any sort of touch of AutoCAD or HSB or CAD work or anything like that since about 2006. I think I abandoned my AutoCAD license back in 2007. So everything I do is in SketchUp, and then I jumped into LayOut. So I've kind of developed a system for doing schematic, real rough stuff, sales models for estimating, and then shop drawings. So I started in the shop. I actually started moving barns. I did a lot of hand cut work. I worked on the shop floor. I got into engineering and design, and now I push pixels all day. I look longingly at my chisels in my toolbox in the garage. I rarely use them, except around the house. But I push pixels around, which is a lot easier than horsing big sticks of wood around on deck sometimes. So I have five methods, sort of, that I typically use to work. We'll let these guys come in and have a seat. Hey, guys. So I typically have sort of 5 things that people ask me to do or that I do for other people. There's schematic design, sales, and presentation. This is kind of like the, hey, what would you do for a timber frame in this space? Meaning, like, they don't really know what they want or they have an idea. There's the hey, can you model this sketch to see if they're interested? I do a lot. It's called 3D. I call that 3D modeling, where a builder or an architect has a client. They don't really know. They're not really sure if they want a timber frame in there. So you whip something out in an hour or two. They send it off. Yeah, they're interested. Hey, this is pretty cool. And you show them a bunch of images on Houzz or Pinterest or whatever. And then there's that turns into the pretty picture to kind of sell the concept, either on, either for a company that's going to hand cut or CNC machine the frame, or the architect to sell the concept, but they're not specialists in timber frames. So oftentimes they'll hire me to do some drawings. A lot of times that will roll into schematic, feasibility, and pricing design, and that's where I kind of refine. Usually send out the first one. Sometimes the architect hates it. Sometimes the client hates it. Sometimes they love it, but you got to actually make it work now because you were doing it at 11 o'clock at night and the dog was barking and the kids were screaming. And then you get the, hey, they love it. How much does it cost? So you refine the design. You actually make it work. And then see where it goes. Oftentimes I hand that off to a company. They develop their own shop drawings. They'll take it into the CNC, or I'll hand it off to an engineer. Occasionally I do permit drawings, which is basically a full package for construction documents for permit. I typically have an engineer I'm not an engineer nor an architect, but I went to school and I'm dangerous in both areas. I can guarantee you that. So I always work with a couple different engineers that are timber specialists. I have a couple architects I work with a lot. So I've sort of built a network of people that I can go to depending on what I'm doing. So when I get into permit drawings, typically that requires a lot more information than just, obviously the pretty picture. They want to know all the loads. They want to know that you're building it to code. Is it going to stand up in the wind? Is it going to blow over or tip over? And on and on. So that's slightly different than anything I've done so far, but oftentimes the same model drags its way through. For permit drawings, I typically detail 1 or 2 of the interior bents or sections, usually the floor system, maybe a couple key joints, just so that the building inspector knows that we're not crazy, and then that gets sent off for permit. Shop drawings are a lot more involved, I think, depending on what you're doing with the project. So we take the permanent engineering drawings and we format and add detail for fabrication. We include, additional dimensions, detail. Sometimes, have a really inexperienced crew, so you got to show them what all the joints look like. Sometimes you have a really experienced crew, so that you can just do call-outs, so that they understand what a tenon that's 12 inches long and 2 inches thick looks like. So typically for smaller shops, I'm doing a lot more dimensioning and hand-holding. For CNC shops, they'll typically take my concept model once we refine it and once we make sure it stands up, and then they'll run it through their own paces. So some of the larger companies will use HSB CAD, which is an AutoCAD overlay, and that'll generate machine code to run a Hundiger or a Swiss CNC machine that'll do a lot of the joinery. Some of them will use CAD work. CAD work actually has a thing now where you can import a SketchUp model directly in. And in these cases, I'm generally not putting any joinery on. It's basically pretty assemblages of boxes, which is what SketchUp is really good at. It's really good at drawing rectangles and long boxes. And for some folks then, I also do whole house and building design. And oftentimes that's around the timber frame. Sometimes it's not, it's just the great room, but I still do the whole house. So this is a whole another process, and this is where you have to juggle the frame and the program, because oftentimes what happens is the program gets out of control, and then the first thing they want to cut is the frame. So you got to kind of juggle the size of the house, the enclosure system. You got to figure out what they're going to need for permit drawings, and all that. And then occasionally on top of that, then they'll hire somebody, and the timber framer will still say, well, can you do the shop drawings? Well, sure, we can do the shop drawings. We've done the engineering, we'll do the shop drawings. So those are the 5 typical methods that I work. I always start with the same template, pretty much no matter what I'm doing. It's either because I'm lazy or because it's just I'm sort of entrenched in my habit. I've got a whole system of layers that I use. If I'm only going to be working on a timber frame, oftentimes I'll just purge out all the architectural layers so I don't have to look at them anymore. But I generally start with my template that has a shell in it. I built a dynamic component so that I can quickly change length, width, and height of a typical gable. A lot of times that's not what houses look like these days. They're not these simple little frames, right? They gable on gable and roof on roof, and they're sprawling sort of monstrosities. So a lot of times if it's not a simple frame, I'll actually build a shell out of surfaces and lines, and I'll create a wireframe model, and I'll hide the surfaces. I make it a component. That's the first rule of SketchUp, is make it a component. And I'll hide all the surfaces, but I'll keep that wireframe and lock it. And I use that so that I can bring other joinery to it, other geometry to it. And the cool thing about that is if I'm thinking like a timber framer, that typically is the interface between the wall, the inside wall, and the back of the timber. And then so if the client then says, well, I want you to develop the house around it, I take that same shell and I copy it into another drawing, and then I build the walls and the roof and the windows and everything else around it, so I don't have to fight the timber frame, looking at the timbers and trying to figure out what I'm doing. And then they say, oh, well, can you develop the interiors for me? I want a kitchen layout and I want this. I take the same shell and I build the interior model, and then I slap all 3 of them together for the architectural set. And we'll look at a little bit of that as we go. So typically I bring in, if I'm working with another architect or engineer, I'll bring in CAD files, or in this case, hand-drawn. I didn't know people still did this, but they do. People still draft. He sent me scans, they would have been 24 by 36 scans of pencil drawings of this project here in the corner. I worked on that 2 weeks ago. So I brought them in, and in SketchUp you can scale that if you have a known dimension using the scale tool. So I'll bring in whatever resources I have, and then I'll start modeling. So when I do schematic and sales presentation, usually it's a rough concept just to get client feedback, and I spend as little time as possible on it. Sometimes because I'm not getting paid yet, trying to get them to hire me or hire the company that I'm going to work with. I try to build as accurately as I can. I have some engineer friends in the timber frame world that scoff at SketchUp. They think it's a toy. SketchUp is a pencil. It's as accurate as you can make it. So the more accurate, I don't have to tell anybody in this room that, but the more accurate you use it, obviously the more accurate your results are going to be. I usually share this either via Sketchfab, JPEG, PDF from LayOut. So I'll have a layout file, and I'll have different companies' logos in, depending on who I'm working with. And in rare cases, I'll send somebody the SketchUp model. Usually I explode everything first. Kind of an a-hole move, but it means that they can't take the model down the street and generate a materials list, right? And then go to somebody else to then take over the project. It's happened before, so it's a lesson I learned. So I bring in resource material, I build a shell, I start placing timbers, and then oftentimes I do rough sizing of, like I said, engineering. I have enough experience, and I've got spreadsheets that I've built for rough beam calcs, so I can calculate a rafter, calculate a floor system. I'll do that stuff by gut. A lot of times I don't even check the numbers, I just kind of size it by eye. And then I share the rough concept, and off we go. So, very simple, pergola. Someone sent me a hand-drawn sketch. I actually got some site photos from the builder. I ghosted it in Pixelmator. This thing got built. I don't have any finished photos, but they built it, which is nice. A lot of times I'll get CAD drawings. So this is for a commercial development in British Columbia. So the guy does a lot of post and beam and glulam work. So I never, for this particular timber frame client, he's actually a timber frame shop, timber frame builder. I never ever do their shop drawings. I usually only do their proposal models. So he'll send me commercial drawings and he'll say, we're bidding on this. Can you spend 4 hours, 6 hours, whatever it takes to throw together a concept? So I have a SketchUp file with I have a style built with his logo ghosted in the back and his logo ghosted in the corner. So usually I just send that to him, and then he does what he wants with it to make his presentation. Again, quick, accurate to size from the engineering drawings. Sometimes I get sketches from owners that want to build a barn. We don't always build what they draw or draw what they drew. And then this one actually turned into, hey, I'd like you to spend some time developing the outer shell. And he was really, really worried about this barn up on the hill being big, too big for the site. So we brought in some Google Earth terrain. I actually rough modeled his house, and I sort of eyeballed some photos in as watermarks, not through PhotoMatch, to get him comfortable with the size of the barn. And in extreme cases, we go to extreme lengths. So this barn came down, I think in Pennsylvania, and they were just going to salvage the timber and put it into a new house. But then they decided, no, we want to use it. We want to use the barn as the house, not just the timbers. We want the same shape. Well, of course, the crew that's out there taking it down, they're working on graph paper, and it's all stained with water. So I got these horrible scans. You couldn't read anything. Nobody thought to check the roof pitch because they just tore the rafters off and threw them away because they were all rotten. So I brought in the PhotoMatch, and I actually used the PhotoMatch to get a really close approximation of the roof pitch. That's the one in the upper left corner. And then I had a bunch of site photos as they were taking it down. So that's the one in the lower right. So with some really rough dimensions of how long this thing was, how wide it was, what we think the plate height was, and some crude dimensions on some rained-on drawings, we were able to develop a scope model. This actually went then off to the architect who was working on the project, so she can build the program around the core of the antique timber frame. This is another schematic design for the town of Pemberton, British Columbia. This was with the Timber Framers Guild, so it was a community build project, which was a volunteer project. And they needed to fundraise, and they needed to get the town involved in how they were going to do this. So again, generate the rough concept. I didn't do any engineering on this other than the prelim, and then I handed it off to somebody. This eventually got built, but I like sharing via PDF with a logo, multiple views, and then I love Sketchfab. And with the new Trimble Connect and the new mobile, or it's not, I guess it's not the mobile, but SketchUp that's going to run in your browser. As soon as I get word that I can lock that file for read only, I'll probably be using that, because then they'll be able to manipulate the SketchUp file. But Sketchfab is a really cool resource. You can actually, this is running right in Safari right now, but you can send this to clients. They actually the town posted this on their project page. Folks were able to go to this and say, check out the barn. They use this for fundraising. And then I have, I don't know, I think I have 50 or 60 models up here. With the Pro account on Sketchfab, you can actually lock files, so only certain customers can see them, so the general public can't see them. You can add custom backgrounds, so I have the Timber Framers Guild logo watermarked in there. You can add annotations, so when things change, and they always do, I can put a bubble diagram to say, hey, this thing changed from an 8x8 to an 8x16. I'm sorry, you're going to hit your head on it, but the engineer wants it that way. So this has been a really valuable tool for sharing without having a tech-savvy audience, so for the general public or homeowners. Let's see if it picks up right where it left off. Yes. So Sketchfab, and this is the building that actually got built. I handed this off to ISL engineers and Robin Zimholt. He's up in British Columbia. They did all the final shop drawings and work, and the Timber Framers Guild built it. So when I get tasked then with, okay, well, we've got this great concept. How much does it cost? Or what do we do with it now? I'll actually, so this is usually where the architect or the owner has upgraded the program. Maybe they've wow, that's really expensive. We don't like it. It's too big. It's too small. So I'll refine the design, make sure the footprint and the volume fit. Usually I bring in new CAD files to make sure we're fitting. And then I will actually get my timber sizes rough calculated. Sometimes I go to the engineer and have them do a quick pre-run through it. Other times I'll actually sit down with my spreadsheets if I'm comfortable with it, and I'll run the analysis on it to make sure the stuff is going to work. And then obviously accuracy of thoroughness of scope, which is what's so cool about building it in SketchUp. I mean, I build everything. So there's no discrepancy. If a timber framer says, Mike, we're bidding this job and we want to get the work, and then there's a contract dispute, they can go back, and I encourage them to include PDFs of the scope model actually into their contract, so it's very clear that this was the timber. No, that whole bump out with the bedroom wasn't included in the price. So I encourage them to use the documents as not only a sales tool, but a pricing tool, and then a contract document tool. So confirm the scope. We confirm the rough timber sizing. So I beam calc. I'll export a timber and panel list. So there's a plugin called Timber Frame Extensions. You can get it on the extension warehouse. It's actually good for furniture too, and it's good for anything that you might do with framing lumber. It's kind of like Generate Report, although it's a lot more streamlined. It'll actually generate a materials list based on your components. So I'll use that to generate a timber list, and then I can send that along with the model to the timber framer or the owner or the builder or whatever's doing it, so they could tally the board footage and the piece count and all that stuff. It's called Timber Framing Extensions. It's by Clark Bremer. And if you have the USB key of knowledge, I actually included it on that in your goodie bag. So the version, I downloaded it over the weekend or last week or whatever, and I included it in my section of the USB disk. But he updates that, routinely. So double check it. But it'll kick out a list. I had this thing called Color Code by Dimension. I had it written by one of the guys on SketchUcation for me. I'll show you how it works in a second. I can actually, one of the problems with sharing sort of digital data is people are like, well, how big is it? Unless they're going to go in and measure every timber. So I had somebody write a script for me to color code the timbers by the face size. So if I have an 8x14, the 8 side is a certain color and the 14 is a certain color. So I'll oftentimes then add to my PDF presentation a color-coded version, and I set up a custom style that has the color bar on the side. And then again, I share via Sketchfab, JPEG, PDF, layout, whatever. So here's my output for this particular model. On the right there, basically an Excel list of the materials. If I had been asked to build the roof structure over this, or if the homeowner wanted me to build a floor system out of TGIs or whatever, I would still use the same plugin to generate that list as well. So SketchUp, if you set up your model right and you think ahead, you can actually get a lot of data out. You can get panel lists out. You can get square footages of your roof, your ceilings, your floors. I mean, there's a lot of data embedded in this model that's handy to use. This particular list will tell me the bulk board footage, and if it's fresh sawn dug fir, I know that I can put 15,000 board feet on a truck before I break the truck coming from the West Coast. So I can get well, that's about a half a truck of wood. Okay, so I got to calculate. It's going to cost me $3,200 to bring it from the West Coast to the East Coast where I live. So all coming from the same model. This one actually got built. This one I actually handed off to a timber frame company that uses CNC. But this is the round in the square. It's pretty wild. It's going to be like this. It's their dining room, I guess. But the architect and the owner said, well, what would you do? And I said, well, I'm going to call your bluff, and here it is. And actually, they decided to go with it. So this is a project, again, a scope model built from an architectural drawing, and I'm trying to build everything that's within the scope for whoever I'm working with. In this case, it's just the timber frame, right? And there'll always be a pretty picture of an interior to sell somebody on it. And here's my color-coded model that I included in the PDF. So the color bar on the left here in my SketchUp model, this is actually just a style that I set up, and this is a watermark. So I brought that in as a JPEG, placed it on the left side of the image. Those colors correspond to the colors that the plugin automagically codes my timbers. So I can do two things with this. I can upload this to Sketchfab, and then I can send it to the architect. And when they say, well, how come you made the braces 6x10? I really wanted them 8x10. I'm like, well, I didn't include that. Would you like me to change it? This is how it looks. I can also include this in any contract documents for clients or builders. So there's at least a concept of, no, those timbers were never 14x14. They were always 10x10. So I found this to be very helpful. And I'll show you if I can do this again. I think I have. So I'll do it on here real quick. So the extension, I had this gentleman on SketchUcation. He wrote it for me. Let's see if it works. So basically, it takes your entire model, and it color codes the faces just like that. And then I can actually go to my style. And if I pull up my scene, now this is really handy because I can do a lot with this. I can not only use it with the client so they understand what the timber sizes are, but I can send this to an engineer and he can quickly run through and see if the timbers are going to be big enough without having to measure everyone. That's one of the downfalls unless you unless you develop a whole set of layout drawings. At this stage, I don't want to do that yet. I just want to, as quick as I can, to iterate the design and get it moving, so I can send this to the architect or the engineer. Sometimes I'll export this to a DWG solid, and I'm pretty sure all the colors come through on the faces that show up in the DWG, so the engineer can take it and work with it. And then I'll show you the other model real quick. So this is that barn. Once in a while, the plugin, like everything in SketchUp, there'll be a choke, and you'll see that it put these as gray. So it either means that A, the timber isn't in compliance, so it's not 7.488888 to 8.0001 for an 8x face. It came out screwy. Either I built the component wrong, or maybe I accidentally push-pulled it. So I'll double check that timber to make sure it's the right size. And then if it is correct, I'll just go in and manually paint those faces before I send the file out. And a handy plugin to have after you use this is TomTom's material tools, because then you can window this and take the color away from your original model. Yep.
It affects when you have like a reverse face or that kind of thing?
Yeah, it'll paint over everything.
Okay.
Yep. I don't know that it reads reversed faces or not.
Okay.
Although I'm pretty anal about my modeling, so a reversed face wouldn't live very long on my models. So that's the color code. And then, like I said, if I can take TomTom, I'll plug TomTom's material tools. You can remove from selection of the entire model, and boom, it goes away. And now I can color them brown or orange or wood textured if I want it again. So I'll close that, and I'll go back to my presentation. So, and then a lot of times I combine some of this stuff. So here's a project I did just about 8 weeks ago, maybe about 8 weeks ago. This timber frame company in Connecticut said, we've got this longtime client, they want to enclose a 50-foot diameter carousel. Can you come up with something? So they sent me just the footprint, and so I developed a timber frame model for it, and I found a clunky carousel on the 3D warehouse. I added some people. I sized the thing so it was 50 feet. The carousel, the timber frame, is actually 70-foot diameter. Again, real quick PDFs. Turned some shadows on. I added their logo. You can see the architectural drawing they sent me is sort of in the background there, so you can see the context. I did a color-coded SketchUp model that I sent back to the client, who is the timber framer. So I ran my plugin. I sent them that model, and then I also kicked out a materials list in a slightly different format, because I was trying to use numbers on the Mac. It's like Excel, so it looks a little different than when I do it in Excel. And then I sent that whole mess to the engineer as well, because part of the scope was I need you to, once the client said, hey, this is crazy, we like it, we need to make sure it's going to stand up. So I worked with Fire Tower Engineering on this out of Providence, Rhode Island. They did all the analysis. So they took the 3D, and I don't know if they used the DWG or the SketchUp file, but they brought it into their 3D analysis software, and they put the wind load on it, they put all the snow loads on it, and then he wrote me a nice summary of all the stuff we got to look out for. And this is just the frame only, so we didn't even count any lateral resistance we get from the walls or any steel connections at the foot bases. So that, even though that looks like it's going to fall over, the worst case deflection under the worst wind load they threw at it was 1/4 inch. So the thing wants to spin 1/4 inch out of plumb. So from here, everyone's comfortable that A, we're not going to break it once we build it, and B, we can accurately price the timber, because sometimes you'll do the engineering too late, and the timbers will be too small, and then someone's got to eat that cost. And it's usually not the engineer, not the architect, or the builder, or the homeowner. It's usually the guy building the frame. So try to be pretty transparent about how that all works. So sometimes then this rolls into permit drawings. Sometimes this is where I step out and I just hand it off to who's ever going to build it. Sometimes this goes into permit drawings. So permit drawings, a little different than shop drawings, but permit drawings oftentimes have all this extra information. So the building department wants to know what you calculated it on. What international building code standard did you use? What's the snow load that you use? Where's the building located? Is it an unprotected site or protected? There's all this stuff. So all that stuff gets slapped into the drawing, and I'm using LayOut to do this. Oftentimes I do the foundation, the steel connections. Sometimes I do shear walls if I need to. I'll detail all that stuff as well. So kind of a lot of stuff. So this is definitely where I'm using LayOut now more for than just creating a pretty picture with a logo on it. I'm actually using LayOut to control visibility of the section, the sections and the scenes that I've set up, and I'm putting a ton of information over the model. So typically, I already talked about this. I share the color-coded model with the engineer. I get feedback. Sometimes we blow it and the thing just isn't going to work. So we got to either add steel, we got to make the timbers bigger. Sometimes, oh yeah, I live in Vermont, so it's like we have a law against earthquakes, so they don't happen. But like when we design stuff out west, seismic sometimes takes a driving role over wind or snow. So I have, sometimes we have to adjust. Then I create scenes for typical bents, walls, and plans. Now, here's where it differs from shop drawings. Usually with permit set, I just need to show one or two sections of the building and how all the stuff fits together. In shop drawings, I usually show every single one. So in this case, we're showing maybe one or two key cuts through the building. I usually have a second model if it's really complicated, where I pull the model apart and I'll model the joiner. I'll model either typical joinery or steel connections. And I'll show you a sample of that. And then I bring the models into layout for annotation. And I have a couple different layout templates. Usually I use the last one that I was in, because they're always just progressing. Like I changed the font, I hated that font. Now I found a new font that I like, or I tweaked the layer thing. But I have a couple different templates that I use depending on who I'm working with. I will develop all the layout sheets. A lot of times there's a copy and paste, so the engineer sends me a text file of all the data for the site, for the building, all the stuff that I really don't want to deal with. That's why I'm paying somebody else to do. I'll copy and paste that into layout, and then I'll publish that for review and eventual stamp and submittal. And I can't remember the last time, I guess I can, it was probably 4 years ago now, that I actually had to print out the set and mail it to the engineer so they could wet seal it, but now everything seems to be done by a PDF where they're doing the e-stamp. So export out a layout, send it to the engineer, they review it one final time and they put their e-stamp on it. I get a set back for my records, and then they send it off to the town, to the builder, to whoever. So I'll show you some samples of that. So here's a building, it's a round barn. It's an 80-foot diameter round barn. There's a lot of engineering data on the cover sheet. So this was modeled in SketchUp. There was actually two SketchUp models that created this, and then everything else was done in layout. I actually found it faster to just, I actually went down to the copy shop and printed out the rough plans, and then I doodled all over them for the joinery. I want to do this here, I want to do that there, and then I took photos and I emailed them to the engineer, and then he emailed me back comments over these photos, which was kind of funny that we printed them out and wrote on a mold school. So like I said, there's two models in this particular job. Sometimes I have 3 or 4 or 5, but there's 2 models in here. So I've got the main, what I would call the architectural model, where I'm cutting sections, I'm cutting floor plans, and I'm using just the section plane tool in SketchUp. And then I typically use section cut face, which is a plugin. I've got to sit down with the guys from Scalp, and I've got to sit down with the Conduct guys to see if that's going to fit my workflow. But section cut face is pretty simple, and it's pretty easy to manage in my workflow. And then the second drawing is stuff that's pulled apart. And I normally only do this at the very end. So I'll do hand sketches of the connections and stuff, and I'm going to pull up a model so you'll be able to see these pieces in detail. But I'll do hand sketches of what the foot connection is going to be, or what the connection of 3 timbers coming in together. And then I'll get the engineer to buy into that, and then I'll actually pull apart my model and then model how all that fits together, so that, in this case, the builder wanted to see how that all works. So here's a typical architectural section. I've got callouts on it for all the joinery and the engineering. I've modeled, all this stuff is modeled in that other file. So these are all little windows into that model with a separate scene. I've modeled all the steel. I've sliced through the round posts. I've cut through where the steel comes through the round posts. And I'm calling all out, it's 1 1/4 steel with so many bolts and so many size plates. And then here's the footer connection for the center posts. It's this giant pipe that got reamed out of the bottom of the post, and there's leveling nuts and all sorts of stuff. So I don't model everything. I know if there was a presentation, I don't think it was in here, but there was another one where he models everything. Like, I did that a couple times, and I pulled my hair out. I model enough to make sure everyone understands what we're doing. Sometimes that means I model a lot, like 75% of the building. A lot of times it's you model enough to get the idea across, and you have a team of people, the good builder, a good timber framer, or a good heavy timber framer, great engineer, great architect, and if everybody is comfortable working with each other, sometimes you don't have to model every little detail or connection. So that's something that you build up over time working with a team. And I think, yeah, there's the building standing. So shop drawings typically take that refined engineered permit set and will include the foundation, steel connections. Again, I utilize layout. This differs though from permit drawings because there's a lot more information that you need for the guys either in the shop or in the field. the building department is not going to come in and check that your rafters are the exact right length to the bird's mouth cut. They're not going to check the center lines of the posts so that the guy can actually cut the pieces that fit in between. So oftentimes I'm adding a lot more dimensions. Depending on who I'm working with, which timber framer or which builder, sometimes that's a lot, sometimes it's not. It really depends on the skill of the people. I've had to actually do a project where I had to lay out every different rafter I had to do a part drawing of because the guys weren't comfortable laying out a rafter based on the roof pitches and the spans between the plate and the purlin or the ridge. So I laid out three different rafters. A lot of times I'll do that with complex roof systems, so valleys. I'll lay out each valley, all four sides. I'll show how that fits together. So again, I'm adding more pieces, parts to the drawing. So valleys, hips, rafters, complex timbers. I do the joinery drawings, typical mortise and tenon, steel connections, etc. It all comes into layout. And then I developed the layout sheets, I kind of think, because I was in the field and I've worked with crap drawings, so I kind of develop it from if I'm standing in the rain and it's cold and I want to go home, what information do I need? So I'm sure 10 years from now, the guy that gets my drawings is going to be screaming at me because I'm going to forget a lot of the stuff, hopefully not. But I try to do the drawings from the sense of being out there in the snow or the muck or the rain. So a lot of times the dimensions you get on an architectural set are great for figuring out how big the house is and what the floor area is and all that, but it's not really good for laying out, trusses or structures or whatever. So mindful of that when I do a set of shop drawings. And then I'll actually try to get the shop to review it before we publish the final set. So, this is what happens. This is actually a project, a Timber Framers Guild project. It was happened in Poland. So the drawings were pinned up. I was delighted when I got this photo back that they were pinned up to the wall. Here's somebody studying it. You often get people arguing over what they're going to do next. There's one of the trusses built. But this is a set with, I think there were 15 or 20 section cuts through it in every different slice. So whereas a normal house or a normal set of permit drawings might have 4 or 5 or maybe 6, one for the plan, one for the second floor, a couple through the building, maybe a couple longitudinally. This has one at every key component that they're going to have to lay out and cut. So each section of this building had a cut through it, and then I would detail that, and then I would also pull off small 3Ds, and I'd stuff them into the corner of my main drawing so that you could see how the rafter dropped on the corner. I've added, so each one of those little numbers there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I think there were 12 bents going one way and 12 going the other way because this whole thing is an intersecting roof. So each one of those represented a section cut in my SketchUp model. And then here's a cut down here where I'm calling out the tenons. And in this case, I didn't have to model all that, I just call it out. So a lot of times my timbers just touch each other. I don't actually model what's going on inside for the joinery. They're a pretty picture. And this is it being installed. So we then came back, and I don't know if our chain hoists are long enough. And so I got the architectural drawings of the museum. So we modeled how high the floor was, and we looked at the chain hoist lengths and how many cables and straps they were going to need. I also found the exact crane that they were going to rent on a 3D warehouse, which was awesome. So I was able to I did a little cartoon as a series of PDF. It was kind of a stop motion animation where the crane came in because it had to fit through doors. So it came in, it unfolded itself. I made sure that the thing could pin itself up. This is a still from that. And then I added dimensions for the crew. So they did actually, you could see the red slings in there, and then the chain hoists, and then the cribbing. I have another shot where the cribbing is all lifted up. So this is actually hanging in Warsaw right now. So, but again, here's a typical set of shop drawings. This is a model of a house, a screenshot. So I've got my layers. I've burned out all the layers I don't need for my template. I've got a ton of scenes. All those scenes represent something that I need to show off in layout. And then there's a couple scenes in there just for working. So each one of those section cuts will relate to my drawing. And then again, I have a separate model where I pull everything apart. And this one I actually do have loaded. So I'll show you what the SketchUp model and the layout file looks like. So here's the layout file, which has got a ton of information on all the post reactions so that the guy who designed the floor deck, which I didn't do, could get blocking in the right place or posts up underneath the first floor deck. Second floor post plan, and then I have this, each one of these things is detailed. Each primary section through the building where there's wood touching wood gets detailed. And then for a long time I was doing this up in the corner where I'd actually turn the the building on with the cutoff missing using the section tool so that you could kind of orient. Because I've been on a lot of jobs where you're standing there and there's like some guy with a set of plans and a chisel in his hand. He's like, well, where does this piece go? And they're thinking about how the building is oriented. So I've been doing this for a while where I'll turn the, I almost hit my down arrow. I got to actually click this because I'm in layout. But you could see that that's changing in the upper left to reflect the where you're at in the building. And I'll sometimes do that on full architectural buildings too. I'll put a little 3D so you can orient yourself. But here's the long cut through the building. And then if we come down, we'll drop down here to, here's a roof. This is the roof plan. And then I'll zoom in here. So this is a little 3D view that I just guided the model and I came up from under there so that they understand that this timber needs to scoop into the other timber. Because they're going to read my call out and they're either going to call me or I'm going to spend the time to do a little detail so I don't have to explain it. Real quick question?
Yeah, when you do the sections, do you actually draw them in 2D or do you just do the section cut and then
I actually use
add detail?
no, the sections, this is all, I'll show you, this is all live. This is a SketchUp model in here. These are all live views into the model. So I'm not.
But are you drafting 2D drawings based on the section?
No, that's my SketchUp model.
Okay.
So I'm using a scene that's perpendicular to that section cut, right? So I'm coming in and setting up a scene exactly what I want to see. And I'm using the section tool in SketchUp to cut away everything I don't want to see. And then I use the plugin called Section Cut Face to fill in the void so you don't see into the timbers.
So you don't see back.
Yeah, you don't see. And then I have actually, so you don't see back behind it is a good point. You'll see it. I had a plugin written for me called Whiteout Plane. And I only use this in shop drawings. In most architectural sections, you want to see what happens inside of the building. In shop drawings, I don't want to confuse the poor guy that's got to figure out how to cut the thing. So I want to blank out what's behind it. And I screwed around with trying to use fog. Using the fog in SketchUp, you can kind of blank out what's behind it. And it was always pretty iffy. So a no-brainer is I had a plugin written that says, you right-click from the section plane, 12 inches behind the section plane, because most of my timbers are 10 inches. Sometimes I have to adjust that. And then 4 feet bigger than the extents of the window. It creates this big white rectangle, and it automatically dumps it on a layer for me. So I don't even have to think about it. And
What's that called?
it's called Whiteout. It's on the Thumb of Knowledge. You can't actually, it's not on any of the plugin, the warehouses. But Tig wrote it for me, and it's on that drive. So you'll find it. I think it's called Section Whiteout or Section Whiteout Plane. But it's one of the rubies under my name on the thumb drive. So let me escape out of there and undo that. And then you'll see here, this is actually the same deal. This is a view into my SketchUp model. And if you come on Wednesday, I'm doing a 3-hour where it's going to be a little more hands-on, where we'll take apart one of these models. 3 hours isn't really enough, but it'll give us a good intro to getting a headache. But I'll show you how we set these drawings up. So here's that, and I'm pretty sure I have that model, the joinery model, open here in SketchUp. So this is the main model. So if I go to a view here, that's my little 3D view that's up in the corner. But I've got all of them, basically all my scenes. And when the tech guy came in and adjusted the resolution, I lost half my windows, so I apologize. But I'll go to the joinery one, which should be here too. So here's the joinery for that. So I just take apart, this is the very last thing I do. I just take it apart and I model it. I just draw it. I'm trying to illustrate how the building comes together. There's some folks that have tried to write actual timber frame joinery plugins for this, but yep.
Your joinery is a separate file?
Yeah, I do a save as, and I'll just do a save as and call it, Bob's House - joinery, or I'll copy out only the timbers I want, but it's a completely separate model, so I never screw up the original. And the same thing is when I put, like, if someone said, okay, can you do a SIP panel? I don't use SIPs all the time, but if they asked me to do a SIP panel layout, I would do a save as and call it SIPs, and I'd build the SIPs right over the timber frame model. So I'm always trying to build on data I already have to work with. And a lot of these little joints and stuff, these little illustrations now, I have a bunch of them. So sometimes I'll just go to a model that isn't even the same project, but it's the same exact configuration. So I'll just bring that in to illustrate how this stuff fits together. So in this drawing, there's only a handful of them. I've had drawings where I've had to show 20 or 30 joints on how they come together. So
why do you do a save as to do a different drawing as opposed to making a layer of 6?
why do I do a different drawing as opposed to a save? Well, if it was a simple project, I would just build it right in the same model. But a lot of times the stuff I work on is not simple. So to me, not having the chance to destroy my work by accident is a good insurance just to have a separate model. So especially for the joinery, because I'm moving everything around and it gets confusing. I try to keep my layers to a minimum, even though I have 20 or 30 layers or sometimes 40 layers. I try to minimize as many layers as I had. So if this was going to live in my main model, I'd have to have a layer for all this stuff, and then I'd have to make unique components, because as soon as I started cutting them apart, my model would change. So I'm trying to minimize a chance for human error, because the dog barks, the phone rings, the FedEx guy shows up, I forget what I'm doing, and then I screw something up and have to go fix it. And I can tell you this from experience. So this has happened in real life. So that's why I do a save as. And I'm going to go back to Keynote. So that's the shop drawing in a nutshell. And if you want to come by on Wednesday, I actually have a set of shop drawings that we're going to take apart, and you'll see how I fit everything together. Usually I have the foundation and a lot of the steel connections as a separate file too. So I'll actually model the foundation under the frame, but then I'll pull it apart to detail it, because I like to cut it apart and show how everything fits in. And I think I have a sample of that coming up. So then whole house and building design around the timber frame. Now there are a couple people here that presented and that have written books that are way better at this than I am. So I still struggle with this part, but I'm refining my workflow, and I'm obviously gonna buy the book and maybe sit down with Nick. But so this is where you're developing the architectural program and the timber frame in tandem, which can be tricky. Oftentimes the architect will design, and I'm not saying this to disparage architects, but when you're not thinking about the structure as a primary visual element and a primary organizing element in the house, you can sort of design the house for how you want it to fit and feel. And the structure happens around, it's kind of invisible, right? You look at a ceiling and it's a wood ceiling or it's a drywall ceiling. The timber frame becomes such an integrated part of the visual impact and how heavy the space feels or how light it feels that you have to do it in tandem. And if you don't, it's pretty hard sometimes. I'll get these programs for companies that I do work with, and they'll say, Mike, we need a timber frame in this. The architect sent it. What do you think? And you look at it and you're like, well, we can, it's like getting a shoehorn out and trying to fit stuff in where it doesn't really want to go. So I try to do that in tandem. And I refine the overall timber frame without committing it, like until I get the owner to really bite on the size and the shape. I just got an email this morning saying, wow, the whole house came in 25% over budget. We're not building it till next year. Full stop, everything. Even though all along the builder that I was working with and the timber, we kept feeding them data. Well, here's how you wanted 53 windows. You kept saying we want light. Everybody wants all this stuff. So this is why I try to refine, basically keep it until they're committed to really develop the stuff. So we were just to the point of going to the engineer for the foundation, the enclosure, and the timber frame. So they're not going to have to pay the engineer this year. Hopefully I'll get paid this year, but they're going to wait till next year. I share early and often, so I push that stuff out as much as I can. People share with me Pinterest boards or house boards, and I look and, they like this kind of design. I push back hand sketches over SketchUp a lot now, where I'll do a perspective of a rough massing model, and I'll doodle some windows on and some siding. I print them out on an old 11x17 office printer. I'll hand do them, and I'll either scan them back in or I'll take photos with my iPhone and send them to the client. Some kind of mixing and matching technology. I also sometimes will show context. So Google Earth, sometimes I'll photo match an existing house if I'm doing addition. And then sun and shadow studies, etc. And again, I'm always trying to think about this in terms of that timber frame. And because I built that shell originally, which is my wireframe guide, this becomes easier because I've got the original geometry saved. And then I'll break the components into separate files. We already talked about that. Timber frame, SIPs, foundation, and then the architectural and permanent or structural set as needed. And then I use layout to assemble all this stuff. So this is the project that they said they're going to wait. It's a really crude, there's some Sharpie marker on that and some pencils, and then I got to clean my scanner head because when I fed them back in, they got these funny lines on them. But so I did a rough massing and footprint to get the kind of the shape and the size right for the house, and then I was doodling over it. I did the same thing on the interior with the timber frame. I drew the first timber frame as pencil drawing inside. I cut a section through the volume, and I kind of had in mind what I wanted to do, but I didn't want to model it until I got them to bite. So I drew it like that. Here's some plan views, really crude kitchen layout with some doodles for some circles for the sink, some circles for the burners on the stove. This house doesn't look anything like this anymore. This is what it looks like now. But it went through iteration after iteration. So then all this stuff comes into layout. I have this file as of 2 weeks ago on the thumb drive, so you can take it apart and look at it when you get back, or if you come on Wednesday. It won't look quite like this because we've made some changes since I uploaded it to the site for the Basecamp. But so this is a terrain model, so that's a separate model. So I copied the house and set it on the terrain. The model on the right is the actual house model, the architectural model, and then the model on the left is I actually built a model of how the foundation and the panels and the floor system and all that works together. And I think I'm going to go to that model right now. So this is the main SketchUp model of the house architecturally. So this is sort of the architectural drawing, and then I have some section cuts through here peeking into the house. So there's only timber frame in a portion of it. There's stacked bedrooms in the back of the house. And here, let me find a longitudinal section. Here's the long section of the house. You can see there's partial timber frame and a floor system, and then there's a walkout basement. So all this stuff got assembled into layout, and I think I have it right here. So here's an overview explaining who's doing what with the structurals. I have this was that sheet I had up before, so this is a separate SketchUp model that I think is unlocked. So this is a model I built just showing how all the components come together. Again, I'm not modeling all this in my main model. I'm like, I'll model that in an hour and be done versus spending hours and hours and hours chasing those details around the whole house. So in the main model, the wall is the thickness of basically the extents of what I've modeled here. But in here, I've modeled all the little strapping bits and trim and flashing and all that to show how it works. And then in layout, if you've not used layout before, it was pretty clumsy when it first came out. You can edit that out of the video. It's gotten a lot better. It's a lot smoother and a lot faster now. And for detailing like this, like I said, I haven't touched AutoCAD in probably 2007, 2008. Everything I do gets detailed here. So I'm putting text on, I'm putting numbers on, and I'm setting up my views. And my approach to building design and construction documents is to illustrate how the pieces parts come together. You know, a lot of people have trouble looking at a standard architectural set, and you're looking at hash on hash and line. There's thousands of lines, and no one really, it's hard to convey unless you're either a good builder or you got a lot of experience. It's hard to convey. I found that working with especially inexperienced clients, a lot of times the client can be the weak link in the design process. They don't understand what's happening, and if you can illustrate for them what's happening with simple drawings, all of a sudden they understand why I had to make why did the foundation get 2 inches bigger? Well, because we can't fit all the stuff on top of it. And here's a great drawing of why it has to work that way. Oh, and by the way, the engineer said all the pressure from the water in the winter is going to crack it. So that's the other reason we made it bigger. But I found that this has been a great tool, not only for clients, but builders that aren't familiar with maybe the products or the project, the type of construction that you're using. So I try to illustrate as much as I can. And I really think of it as illustration more than anything. So this is a house. And this is another one. This is kind of absurd, but I'll run it through so you can see that you can do simple and really complicated. So this client, the client is actually a timber framer, and he also general contracts. So he's going to build the frame, and then he's going to do all the cabinetry and a lot of the interior work. This thing is massive. It's modeled on an old gambrel barn. You can see my screenshot of my original SketchUp model on the left, and then just the timber frame. He did all the timber frame work to about 75%, and he sent it to me, and I cleaned it up and made it work with how I like to work. So I made everything solid. I cleaned up all the extraneous lines, and I modeled all the cupolas for him. He didn't like to do the compound work, so I did all that work for him. And then we built all the walls and all the windows and all that stuff. So this is his permit set. We basically took this all the way up to having the engineer final stamp everything so the owner could chase around funding, make sure they had the money, make sure they wanted to do it, make sure the town wasn't going to freak out. And it's been sitting in limbo for 8 months, but we'll see if it comes back. But this set, again, I'm highlighting cuts through the building. It's not as detailed as a shop set, so I only have 3 or 4 cuts going across the building, and I think 2 or 3 cuts going the other way. I've got a lot of cuts for the foundation and all the details there. And let me show you this model real quick, and I'll show you the layout file so you get a sense of how that works. I can close you down. So this is looking at one of the views that I set up in the model. And the model should be right here if we did it right. So here's the model with all my cuts on it, and I've got them turned on here just for illustration. And if I go to my, see if I can find my scenes, and we do a, let's go barn along 2, I think. So here's that scene, and I'm going to take it back to layout. I got it flipped, but you get the idea. It's the same scene, and in this case, because this model was so complicated and there was so much going on, I did some trickery. Actually, it worked out a lot smoother than I thought. So layout will render in vector. If you use layout, it'll render in vector, which is really crisp lines. I use that for about 90% of shop drawings and anything where I'm doing a technical drawing. On pieces like this where I need to show a little bit of texture and I don't get into rendering. And I'll tell you a funny story after the camera's off about that. But so I'll do I'll put wood is brown, stone is gray or dark gray. Exterior wood is orangish brown. Or sometimes gray brown. Like I keep it everything really simple, but there's still a lot of stuff in here. I brought in a lot of stuff from the 3D warehouse. All the windows have transparency, so my little laptop, which is all that I work on, was really struggling every time I changed a page to re-render the whole thing. So I've rendered all the base cuts, the views into the model as raster, which is really quick, and then I laid a second window over the top that's just the hardline edge, and I render that as vector. So this is really quick now because it can render the raster image really fast. And then I said, wow, that's really complicated. There's all sorts of stuff going on. So in between those two, I laid like a 20% gray rectangle in layout to sort of ghost out. So that's why it looks a little fuzzy up here. But I sort of ghosted that out, and I'll turn it off so you can see it. If I turn off ghost, you can see the change. And on a project like this, I think it's worth it to convey sort of the sense of depth from where the cut is taken into the rest. And I've used this on 3 or 4 projects now, this technique, and it's slowly getting faster and easier for me to do. Since they updated, remember I said that layout originally was pretty cumbersome. They've now, you can now group things and everything stays on the same layer. So now I can have the raster layer, the ghost layer, and my hard-edged vector line all grouped together, and I can move those around together. And they all maintain their layers, so I can control visibility without having to fight the software. Like it's logically working now. So this is a pretty involved project. If I go to my pages, I think we have 25 sheets, and we're not quite ready to build it yet. There'll probably be another 10 or 15 by the time we get ready to build it, and then there'll be a full set of shop drawings on top of it. But this will include most of the foundation details. I have a lot of that already worked out. So here's all the data from the engineer, copy-pasted in. I showed the primary structural components over there. I've got all my layers of my footers and foundations called out, and then we're calling out dimensions, the sizes of the piers, all the notes on it. And we didn't quite we got to the main deck framing, but we didn't quite get to showing all the rebar and stuff in the drawings. So.
Yeah, and you prepared the structural plans yourself, and your engineer review it, or?
I work back and forth, so I'll send him the model, and I'll say, hey, I need a foundation for this. We usually get on a screen share, and we'll rotate the model around, and we'll talk. If it's complicated, he'll say, I need some time to analyze it, and then I'll do the drawings, and then they'll review it. But on this project, the structural engineer that I work with happens to be licensed where this is going to be built, so he'll stamp the entire set. He'll stamp the whole set of permit drawings, and then he'll eventually stamp the shop drawings as well. So it's kind of one-stop shopping. And it turns out, I found out it's a little actually cheaper for my clients to work that way. I guess I got to either increase my bill rate or something, because the engineer, it would be almost a full third more if they did everything, draw all the plans and all that. So, but it's been a good relationship. I have 2 or 3 people that I work with like that a lot. So this is the deck plan, and all these funny colored lines. That's actually just done in layout. I didn't do that in SketchUp. I don't need to model every TGI, so I just put some indication marks on there. 16-inch on center. The steel beam is actually modeled in the SketchUp section because I wanted to show how it all fits to the foundation, and I've got the bolts and the posts in there. But all those colored lines are all called out right in layout for what they are. And a lot of times it's because they change. So, I can adjust the thickness of the floor cavity, but I don't want to have to go back in and remodel all the TGIs and all the rim joists and I don't want to chase those details around the project. So that is, that's sort of an overview of my process. Here's a list of plugins. So Timber Frame Extensions by Clark Bremer, that's on the the SketchUp extension warehouse. Section Cut Face by TIG, that you have to go to Sketchucation to get. And they have a really nifty plugin manager as well. So I actually use both. I use the native SketchUp plugin manager, and I use the Sketchucation plugin manager. And if you have the stick of knowledge, I think some of these are on there, the ones that you can't get easily. Material Tools by TomTom, I really like that because sometimes I'll bring in something from the warehouse and it'll be, no offense to whoever made it, but it would be hideous. It's like, why is the couch that color? So I'll use those tools to replace the color or strip the colors out of it or change the transparency of windows so they render faster. Whiteout Plane by TIG was written. I had him write that for me. So that's on the stick of knowledge. Color by Dimension by SD Mitch. I believe that's on the stick. That's an old school Ruby file. So that's a .rb, so you got to install it manually. So you got to remember to go to the plugins folder and put it in there. Mirror by TIG. Solid Solver by TIG. Engineering Toolbox is another one I use. I also use Bolt Maker, Copy Along Path. I mean, there's a whole host of them I use, but these are the core ones that I use in my workflow. And then, and if you want, if anyone pings me, I have my email address. I think it's on the app too. I can email you that list. So here's my software and services that I use. Layout, I use obviously Layout. Sketchfab for sharing, and I paid for a pro account, so I can lock files and then that password protected, so that only the clients can see them if it's a sensitive project or they like their privacy. I can also add custom backgrounds. So I have maybe 3 or 4 backgrounds saved on Sketchfab. So if I'm doing a project for a timber framer, I can put their logo behind it, and then they can send that to their client, and it has their logo watermarked behind it. And then one of the other plugins that I didn't mention was Alex Shire, who's here. He got mentioned this morning. He wrote a Sketchfab exporter, and it's a plugin that runs right in SketchUp, so it sends the files right to Sketchfab. So I just delete everything I don't want, or usually what I do is I do a save as, delete everything I don't want, and if I only want the frame or if I want the whole house, hit go, and it uploads it to my Sketchfab account for me, and then I go to Sketchfab and I fine tune it. Pixelmator or Photoshop for image editing, Bluebeam for Mac, hooray, finally, a decent architectural PDF app. It's still a little crusty around the edges, but it's coming along. Numbers or Excel for materials lists, so that materials list, you can, right in SketchUp, everybody knows you can generate report, which will spit out a lot of information. The timber frame extension actually has a pretty streamlined extension for spitting out materials lists. It's really great for framing lumber, for furniture, for timber frame. I've used it for all sorts of odd stuff. If you can just don't look at the weird output of, because it's trying to figure out what size every component is. So you'll need Excel or numbers to do that on a PC. That app will actually launch, or that extension will actually launch Excel for you, and your data will show up in Excel automatically. On a Mac, because of the sandboxing, it'll save it to a text file, and then you import it into either numbers or Excel. I use Affinity Designer or Illustrator occasionally. So I'll manipulate, client, when a timber frame company will, hey, I want to send this to my client. I'm like, great, send me your logo. And they'll send me their logo, and I'll delete out the background, and I'll drop it in as a watermark. So occasionally I have to do a little art direction and adjusting. I've also used Affinity Designer to take a SketchUp model. The Affinity Designer is like Illustrator, but I'll take a SketchUp model, except it's way cheaper. And I unfolded it, and I built a complex roof kernel, and then I had it laser cut out of thin veneered wood so I can assemble it and show someone how a really complicated roof fit together in real life. I use Zoom for conference calling and screen sharing. It's great. I used to use GoToMeeting, if you're familiar with that kind of stuff. It's a lot cheaper, and it's a lot lighter weight app. But I do a lot of live modeling where I'll be on the phone with clients and they're watching my screen. And I even had to do this. I was on the road a couple weeks ago. I did it over LTE, so my phone was the hotspot. SketchUp was open on my Mac. I was sitting in my car, not driving, and we were doing a Zoom conference, and then I got my overage fee for my cell phone, for my data plan. But it worked. It was pretty wild. And then like I said, I don't really have AutoCAD anymore. I haven't had it in a long time. But I found DraftSite by Dassault Systems. It's free in beta on a Mac. I think there's a free or a cheap version on the PC. It's a really simple, streamlined DWG editor. It reads native DWG files. Occasionally I'll get stuff from architects, and there's just so much stuff in there that SketchUp will choke on the import, and I don't want to go clean it up. So I'll actually open it in DraftSite, and I'll go clean up, I'll delete all the stuff, all the hatches, all the weird line weights and stuff. But that's another piece of software that I just discovered about a year ago, and I've been using it, and I'll do that to bring it in before I clean things up. So I'm not upset if you want to get up and bolt, or if you need a cup of coffee, that's great. If anyone wants to stay and ask questions, I'm happy to do that right now as well.
You said your hands-on class is this Wednesday?
It's Wednesday, yeah. It's the timber frame and SketchUp.
At 9, I think?
I think it's at 9, yeah. Yep.
Let's say hypothetically you can't be there and kind of missed that part in the beginning.
Yep.
And you're talking about color coding and the way that you structure your constructions. Do you use just SolidWorks components or groups and then?
Yeah, so everything in here is a component. And I'll sometimes group them. And I use layers for visibility. Yep. So yeah, the first rule of Fight Club is make it a component or a group. So I'll do that, make it a component, and then work from there. And then sometimes I'll group like components. Again, it depends on what I'm going to do with it.
So the joinery that you showed us in the exploded views, that's just based on your own experience of how they would fit together. It's not necessarily how the geometry is laid out.
No, that is how the geometry is laid. Yeah, oftentimes it's the same. I'm pulling apart the same model. So I'll do a save as of the model, and then I'll just model 1 or 2 joints based on that instance for that particular project. So, and sometimes, somebody's like, well, I don't know what a undersquinted scarf joint looks with 2 wedges. So I'll model it, and I won't send them the exact one from their project, but I'll say, this is what it looks like. Here's the one I did a couple years ago, and I'll send them a picture of that. So that's all context driven, it depends on how much information they need. So
What's the joint you just said? That sounds crazy.
it's I might have butchered it, but it's like an undersquinted scarf joint with wedges. So it's like, I don't.
Sounds like something from Harry Potter.
It's it could kind of be from Harry Potter, and then you can add,
Timber framing.
yeah. So, yeah, and if you're into heavy timber construction and timber framing, check out the Timber Framers Guild. If you don't know about them already, they're a nonprofit. I'm doing the shop drawings for a community build in Saratoga. That's going to happen in the fall. So it's the community hired the guild to put on an educational component. So there'll be between 50 and 100 volunteers, from people that have never touched a chisel before to the lead crew that's getting paid to teach people how to timber frame. And they're going to stand up a building in about probably 15 days. And then there's the Structural Insulated Panel Association the week after is going to lead a workshop on how all the panels fit around this building. So, and then the Timber Framers Guild National Conference happens at the end of all that. So.
How much pushback or ridicule do you experience being full SketchUp? And is that a barrier to your
Now,
business?
no, it's not a barrier. It did cause some trouble. I actually had one company that didn't want to touch the files. I finally convinced them to take it, and they were amazed. I mean, again, it's a sharp pencil, and the sharper you make it, the better it'll be. They were actually amazed at how tight everything was where it was supposed to be. And their experience was a client sends them a SketchUp model of a house, and they want them to put and no offense to anybody that's trying to design their own house and they don't have a lot of experience with SketchUp, but there's a whole leap from hey, I'm going to draw my it's like going into Staples and buying the home designer kit, versus sort of knowing how to set up for timber frame or for whatever. I did get a lot of pushback. I still get pushback from a couple engineers I work with occasionally, and I just don't like working with them. I mean, it's like, well, okay, I'll take my business elsewhere. You can charge $275 an hour and have 30 people that run Revit because you need an IT staff to keep it running, and I can do this from my spare bedroom or my hammock or my whatever, and I'm good with that. So.
At $275 an hour?
No. No. I don't. That's not my bill rate. Yeah, I'm not hiring, and that's not my bill rate. So I wish I could be hiring, but yeah.
Just keep your unit snap settings set at.
In SketchUp, I never. Oh, in layout, the dimensions. I'll change the dimension tolerance, but in SketchUp, I don't think I've ever adjusted the unit snaps because I always everything I build, I'm typing the dimension. So if I'm going to create I never eyeball it. I never move something 10 feet or whatever. It's always a number, so I know what that number is supposed to be. I've had instances where I was modeling where I had to, I forget what the issue was, but I was working with someone Well, now I know what the issue was. The timber wasn't square, and the joint that I sent him didn't look like what I had sent him, so he was freaking out. So after about an hour on the phone and iPhone photos back and forth, so I actually changed the units in my model, and I torqued the timber to look like what he showed me in his photo with a square on it, and then I recut. Then I used the solid tools in Pro to recut the two timbers that collided with it, and then I unfolded that and sent him 2 sheets of 24 by 36 that he printed out, and he taped them to the timbers, and then he did his layout. So it was this full size template. Well, it was a purlin with a valley rafter coming over the top, and if this is skewed and this one's skewed, the triangles get really wonky really quick. So, but I actually, in order to do that, I actually went into the units, and I think I changed to decimal inches so I could see 0.000, and I sort of tweaked things to get it to work. But I don't even think I've ever.
Layout, your dimensions are set to.
Well, so if in layout, if it's an architectural thing, it's usually a 16th. If it's a shop drawing, if it's a compound roof, and I'm doing like a valley, I'll set it to 30 seconds. And I'll be damned if there's a guy out there that's actually ever looked and done a 30-second. I mean, I would like to know that they are, but if I'm pulling dimensions on something complicated like that, I'll do a 30-second, or if it's a smaller piece, but typically no tighter than that. I have done some 3D modeling for myself for bike parts where I've 3D printed them, and that I usually work in millimeters, and that the accuracy is way higher, but I'm not dimensioning those. I just send them to the printer and they magically show up. So, but any other questions?
How do you get your work? Are you freelance or you work for a company?
Yeah, so I used to work for a timber frame company. I got burned out. I quit, moved to Vermont. I started working for a SIP panel company and I grew up in sort of AutoCAD, HSB. So I came out of a shop working with my hands and somehow got sucked into design. The guys kicked me out of the shop up to engineering. I got burned out, and I was doing consulting for a little bit on my own. And so now I have a small group of companies that I do regular work for. I do sales and business development for one company out of New York State. So I sort of work with professionals on the East Coast for them. So that's a steady sort of gig. And then the rest of my work is all, a timber frame company or an engineer comes to me and says, I'm not set up to do this. Would you like to take the work on? And that's what I do. So yeah, I formed a LLC 4 or 5 years ago now. So it's just me. So.
And just from the business sense.
Yep.
It seems like your projects, as all projects, change and evolve as
Yep.
they come. So are you working hourly? You get a bid price? Or?
Yeah, so that's a mix. Usually what I'll do is I like to do, so I have a client, a homeowner who called me from Long Island, and he wants me to design a barn. And he kind of has a rough idea. So what I propose to him is I work hourly until we get the scope, the size, and the shape finished. And then I'll give you some estimates on what it's going to cost to get it done. So, and it's changed a lot, and he's just run up the bill because what he thought he wanted, he didn't want, and I could kind of hear that in interviewing him. So when I do a full house design, I actually send out, one of my clients actually thought I was a marriage counselor and a psychiatrist, because I sent him this lengthy interview that they had to write out, and I asked him to fill it out separately, and then I get it back, and there's competing versions of what they think the house is going to be, and so you have to reconcile it. So usually when I get that data back, I can start to make an educated guess about what it'll take to do it. A lot of the timber frame work I do with my regulars, it's hourly. I just send a bill, but a lot of times it'll be like, yeah, I think I can get that done. It'll cost between $800 and $1,000. Do you want me to add the engineering and the PE stamp? We can do that too. It's going to add another $1,200 or whatever. So I sort of ballpark it, and then I'll price from there. I have done a couple projects where they wanted fixed. This is what it's going to cost, and I need it. And I can tell you that on every single one of those, I made wages at best. So it's sort of a juggle. You got to sort of read your client. I usually do with new folks that I haven't worked with before. I usually ask for a retainer, and I sit on the retainer until I release the final drawings, and I hang on to that retainer until I get paid. I usually get paid. The latest I've been is 90 days from some folks out in California that just were dragging their feet, even though they were putting holes in the ground and building the thing, but it came through. So that's sort of my model for how it works. So I'd prefer, I try to build relationships. That's my goal. So I work with a lot of people that I really like to work with. And I've worked with a couple of a-holes, and, that happens. And well, maybe more than a couple. It's not a couple dozen, and it's more than a couple. But we'll just leave it at that. So. Yep.
I have a basic question. There's a technique I saw it's a vaguely, if you could explain how you did it. It was a
Yep.
little gazebo that you put a photo behind,
Oh, yeah.
and I don't know how to do that.
So that, I think I have that model.
I haven't played with photo match much.
I didn't do that in Photo Match. That's the funny thing. I actually just exported. If I can find it, I'll show it to you. I just exported the, if you actually set your, I don't know that I'm going to be able to find it. Pergola, here it is. So I did do this, and this was the first thing that I sent the client. Right? Looks a little crude. It looks very different than the one that I showed in my screen in my presentation. Right? So what I ended up doing is you can't control for the visibility behind the couch and the person and all that. So what I ended up doing is if in SketchUp.
Are those SketchUp couches?
No, those aren't SketchUp couches. This is actually that's just a photo. I had a blank photo of the backyard, and then I exported, let me see. I basically got this view sort of where I wanted it, and I exported this, and if you export that from SketchUp as a PNG, you can select to make the background transparent, and then I went into Pixelmator, and I erased the back of the post that the couch cropped off, and I erased the woman's legs because she was standing behind the couch, and then I put that import on a separate layer, and I made it like 80% so you could kind of see through the timbers. And that's it, yeah. The barn I showed earlier, that was plastered right in SketchUp, and it exported right out of SketchUp. I didn't even fuss around. But once in a while I'll do stuff I'll bring the raw file into to an art program. There's nowhere near as sophisticated as the folks that showed stuff this morning.
Yeah, how do you get your perspectives on that? That's probably a big thing, right?
Yes. So if I'm going to do something where I'm trying to, like an addition, so sometimes I will do a photo match, and I will go in and get the raw geometry of like an addition of the main building done, and then I'll bring the model to it, and I'll stick it on the, because in photo match you can generate, two sides of the building, or sometimes you can do multiple photo matches. So sometimes I will do that. I'll model the actual, shape of the end gable and then the building, and then I'll bring the addition to the building. And if you scale it right and do it right, then the size is right. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll just bring the photo in as a watermark, and I can show you an example of that. It'll be easier to show you than explain it, assuming I can find it.
Is this something you'll probably go over in Wednesday's class?
This will not probably. Well, we could talk about it Wednesday if you're going to be there. Yeah. Let me see if I have it here. Easy enough. Got to remember the project name though. Sayer Barn. The question is, will I grab the right one? Because there's a lot of them. Yeah, that's the wrong one. But let me find that image. Here's the image here. Essentially what I did is, and I can show you this later. I'd have to dig out the right file. The image that's you sort of cropped in the upper corner there, the right, I brought that in the style, as a sketch. I created a SketchUp style where I imported that as a watermark, and I set it to the background. And then I took, since I had the Google plan in, I could see the pool, and I could see the pool in the photo that I just brought in, and I just orbited it, and I zoomed in and out, and then I also adjusted the angle, the field of vision of the camera in SketchUp to get it to sort of line up close enough. And because he sent me the plan of his house, I didn't model his whole house, but I had all the bumps correct. I modeled the flat roof just for the footprint. I could see where you could see the edges of the house are lining up. So it's all eyeball in this case. Yeah, that's how I did it in this case. I didn't go through the photo match. Now, in the barn, this is easier for the stuff that doesn't need to be, if he had said, I want you to add this onto my house, I'd have gone through the trouble. I've gotten some really good photos of his house and done a photo match and then plunked the thing on after I did some hard work. But in this one, this actually was a photo match, and I matched the inside corner here and here and here. I matched that photo, and then when I started to build the timbers, I used that geometry as the guide for it. So it really depends on what you're trying to do. This one is just a JPEG pasted in as a texture. I just pasted it in and plunked it in front, and I scaled it, and then I pasted it over my building in order to just show the context of the original structure. So again, it really depends on what you're doing. But the watermark to show how something fits on site is so quick and easy. Yeah. So, anyways, any last questions? Thank you. Thanks.